This is the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. And welcome everybody to this episode of the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. I am your host, John Allen. And remember everyone, wherever you're listening to me or watching me, please subscribe. That will give you the ability to get a notification every time I release a new episode. And speaking of new episodes, here I am with Ka Man Mak. Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. And I've been really looking forward to this episode. I seem to be looking forward to all of my episodes recently, but maybe you have a little bit of fault in that because I've come into a circle of friends, a circle of acquaintances where one person knows the next guest that I have, so they suggest them and so on and so on. So there's 2 or 3 people that suggested you and I get in touch with each other. And I had Rawa on yesterday and she spoke very highly of you. So here we are now with this little circle of friends and acquaintances now. It's been a kind of a series, a thread in my podcast for the last week or so. Are you there?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I know. Yeah,
Okay,
I can hear you. I might have some Wi-Fi issues. I've been having that issue for the last week. Okay. It's been a real, but it comes back on quite quick.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, so this is a conversation I've been looking forward to having. You are the founder and an investigative journalist for the Oslo Desk. Tell us, what is the Oslo Desk?
Well, I usually go by the story of how it started. So yes. I'm going to do that, because
please.
Then you get an idea of why it was started in the beginning. Because right now we're at a point, everyone's asking me like, is this a newspaper? Is this a podcast? Is this a news magazine? What is it? Exactly. And
do you say yes, all the above?
Exactly. So we're everything in sense. We kind of have this aim of, becoming a bit like Vice, basically. But basically about 3-4 years ago, it was a point in my life where I wanted to become a journalist. And it was a time where I wasn't really sure how, because my background's in environmental geoscience. And then my sort of migrating to this new career path, it was a combination of many different things really at the time. It was kind of, because I was writing as a creative writer at the time, but also I got to, I had a student who I was teaching Cantonese, but he's a journalist himself. And then at the same time, I had a friend of mine who was going through something really horrible, and I ended up becoming a bit of a detective.
Oh, interesting.
And helping her dig into the system here and what kind of help she had. She was kind of very down. She didn't know where to look. And I said, let's see what I can do, So it was a stalking case. During that time, there was no anti-stalking law, particularly including digital stalking.
This was here in Norway online. You're talking about?
Yeah, this was Norway. This is Norway, And thankfully there was an NGO that was helping victims of stalking, because it was horrendous. Politicians were getting foot stalked, and there were parents who were getting stalked. And there was one case that kind of went on a Norwegian newspaper where a mother had to change, I think, 20 kommuner, 20 places with her kids just to get away from her stalker.
That's a lot of moving.
Exactly.
And that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure on the victim to have to fix the issue themselves.
Right, exactly.
Now, what year was this when your situation was?
This was in 2000. Let's see. I think it must have been 13, 14, I guess.
Okay,
yeah. So it was just at the point where I was trying to develop a career in journalism and still trying to figure out how.
Yeah.
But I knew I know how to write, and I started from there and looking at how I could help people around me. But that's the thing is I realized that even when I written the story out, I approached a lot of Norwegian newspapers and they wouldn't, publish a story or anything like that. And then I only knew from my student who was a journalist that that's not possible because you're not a staff type of thing. It's like, but what?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. So I'm like, okay, maybe there's something I don't know about the industry very well. I need to find.
So in other words, it's not like it is in America where if you're an independent journalist, you can submit a well-written or a well-documented story and a major news organization will pick it up, but they don't do that
right,
here
exactly.
in Norway. Not very often.
It doesn't seem like that. No,
maybe for some of the weekly magazines that are in some of the newspapers, maybe people can do that. But
it felt like for me, what he was telling me and what I understood from the industry here is that they have to know you first. So say for example, if you're already a student and they got to know you as a student before they know your work and everything. But from an independent one, they probably like, no, I don't know you very well, so I'd rather not go down that road.
Regardless of what the story is, and regardless of how well written or well documented the story is, there's just no way in.
No. So the thing was, it was interesting because I realized the other way to actually get in is actually become an opinion, debater, and you can write this op-ed pieces in. I was like, well, there's that way, but why can't you become a contributing writer or journalist in some sense, which really frustrated me. So I ended up having to, go through some years trying to figure out, okay, let's hone the skills online, because there's no way I'm going to pass the Baggins test, which is an advanced Norwegian level. And I realized that I don't want to spend years and years trying to, perfect that language that's going to always be native for me. And so I built up my own, self-learning path, taking on projects and looking at how the case has been run through different, media, looking at New York Times and so forth and how they're running the stories. And then I started volunteering for a local startup, a newspaper, and I like, okay, let's try, even though like my Norwegian is, good enough. So, but I knew that they were going to do some editing anyway. So I was like, okay, let's try. And I had an aim, like I'm going to write just 5 articles in Norwegian. I just need to get out there. I need to know how the process works. I need to understand how the mentality of, the newsroom work here. So I did that. I did actually 7 articles, but
where did you submit them?
Yeah, I submit to them. So because I was a volunteering like journalist, writer.
Just to different newspapers?
Yeah, it was it's a startup. So at that time, it was like a local Oslo newspaper that was just starting up, and they needed writers, they needed people, and they're willing to kind of train you as well and all that, which is very nice. But I realized at the end of it that how they were running news is not how I want to run news. I realized that the newsrooms didn't have the competency to deal with particularly, how should I put it, the racism issues, the kind of diversity issues, and, how the narrative amongst immigrants are. And it kind of kept perpetuating a certain narrative that I felt that they didn't realize and put me into a bad spot, basically. So I kind of felt...
Do you think that's simply because of the lack of diversity in the workforce in these media outlets? In other words, there's no Black or brown people working there. So how is that news outlet going to properly tell the story of those issues and those struggles? Is that what you're thinking?
Definitely that plays a part in it, but it's also ignorance. It's also ignorance. It's kind of this blind spot that they didn't think it was an issue, until and they kind of they have their own unconscious bias that they don't realize. But I realize it, and I'm like going, and because like I written an article, unfortunately, it was not taken very well. I think like if I had an editor with that kind of competence. So what happened is that the very last article I written was about an African mother who, everything was true in the sense that, she had to either choose to kind of carry on studying her degree so that she can continue to taking a student loan, or drop it and be able to take NAV support. So I think like that was unbelievable, the fact that she had to choose either or, and she was a single mom at the time and she was struggling. And, when the article came out, it was horrifying to see so much trolls in the comments.
Yes.
And it was and obviously that impacted her.
I just want to say for those for my non-Norwegian listeners, I have some listeners back in the States, for example, NAV is the social support element, the welfare element in the Norwegian system, just so they understand when you mention NAV. I should kind of explain that. So then it's like she's kind of
in between
stuck.
things.
Yeah,
And
she's kind of
she's
stuck.
stuck. And it's like, why are you being so mean to her? I didn't understand it. And, because of, I kind of went paralyzed afterwards because
Sure.
I actually, her friends were a bit annoyed with me. Like, how can you publish such an article, knowing that this will happen? And then on the other hand, I had my editors going like, they're getting calls from the NAF saying that I have fabricated the story. And
Wow.
I had to, so I was like, shit, I'm at a point where I feel like I'm the enemy.
Well, what was Nov's basis for claiming that it was fabricated? What?
They think like I didn't have the evidence. They think like, the
evidence is the direct word of the African mother. There's the evidence right there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing was like the editor was asking me, hey, did you call them up? Do you know who it was the saksbehandler, which is the person who's handling her case, the caseworker. Exactly. And I said, yeah, I got all the information. I got the evidence here. If you want it, I can go to you. I said that I called them twice and I couldn't get through. And I actually literally recorded the whole entire waiting situation and going through the people, because I knew from my work, as a person of color, as a journalist, if they could find anything, it would be your integrity and
yes.
whether you've done your story right, and all that. So I made sure everything was documented. Right. So when that happened, I realized that I kind of felt a little bit that the newsroom, the editors weren't really backing me. I kind of feel like they were kind of saving their own skin at that time, and I got incredibly depressed afterwards. And I was actually going to leave journalism. I was going like, I'm done. I'm done with all this. I don't know if I'm doing anything right. But it took some time when I got really annoyed of the media at that time. That there was an article that came out from Sylvia Listhaus. She's the FRP, which is this anti-immigrant, party here. Or they like to call themselves not the, anti-immigration party. They call themselves the Progress Party, but I don't know where we're progressing.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay. And then I remember like she literally was saying in that article that the press covered was, as foreign mothers, you should be happy the fact that your child is left here in Norway, but you should go back to your own country. And I thought that was so inhumane. And I was a single mother.
It's very inhumane. And we see a lot of that kind of talk online and in the comments section to some of these online newspapers and the online division of some of the television news stations. The comments are just flooded with those kind of statements. Yeah, leave your kid here, but you go back. Now think about that people can actually say something like that to a parent. It's inhumane. You use the right word. It's inhumane.
It is absolutely inhumane. And the fact that I felt that the media weren't even being critical about what she was saying, that made me even more upset. Yeah. And obviously, I was actually here when the Breivik thing happened. So I remembered it very well, how it all ran down. And I just realized at the point, like, okay, suck it up. Yes, you made a mistake, but maybe use that as a lesson, because more than anyone else, how that feels now. You had to be, culturally sensitive, racially sensitive. Let's start from there. So that's kind of where I got to the point where I wanted to start something like the Oslo Desk. I didn't really know. It was just kind of an idea that came to my mind that I wanted to change how journalism was covered. And it was only at that time when I was talking to colleagues and friends of mine around me who was working in journalism that they told me that the term that I needed to use was constructive journalism, because that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to not just talk about the challenge, I wanted to look at the solution, because I think that as long as we start talking about the solution and the root causes of the problem, then we're actually moving forward.
And that is an element, and that's an element that is very, it's leaving a big black hole in today's news picture. So much talk about the problems, so little talk about the solutions. You have pundits who come in or panelists who come on, and they have all these facts about what the problems are and who to blame and where to point the finger. But I don't hear I hear very few people talking about any kind of a solution, any kind of dialogue with the opposition, so to speak. Where is that,
Exactly that point. And I think it was really interesting for me when I started my investigations here that there's a lack of research that backed me up. So I actually had to do the research. I had to kind of formulate the problem, you know. So a lot of people are like going, okay, you know, I'm looking at your site, but you're saying you're constructive journalism, but you're still talking a bit about the problem. But I said that's because the problem is not recognized yet.
Yes.
And so I had to do that work first. You know, I had to understand, like, okay, the bank problems that immigrants were facing, you know, what were the impacts to that, you know, and also collecting situations of the you know, foreign mothers, you know, how their situation is like, meeting with the system, with the courts, and, you know, biased psychologists and so forth. And it became, you know, it was very annoying for me, I must admit.
I can imagine.
It's such a frustration because, you know, you're trying to cover like a problem that is in the UK or the US. So I had to keep falling back on researchers in the UK and the US who've covered these stories before, who has the statistic, who have researchers looking into this. Like even like the simplest, you know, the barriers to financial, you know, services for immigrants, that is not done here. I was completely shocked because in the UK, there's a think tank that built a lot of research around this, and I actually saw the consequences. It was a whole entire like research project, papers that talked about this, and I had to rely on that to understand like the consequences. Not that, you know, the consequences is not obvious or anything. But,
so Norway has a big blind spot when it comes to that, and when it comes to other issues, they're just not. Again, probably what motivated you to start the Oslo Desk is because some of these issues just aren't being spoken about in the Norwegian news. They have a blind spot for it. It's not an issue for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's such a big blind spot. It also kind of doesn't help my work either, you know, because it's like, you know, I rely on so many people to give me the understanding, like researchers, you know, people who work in, you know, maybe as lawyers, as, you know, in the police and so forth. But if they're already biased, if they don't even have it, they don't really see the challenge or the problem in the first place, and you're asking them the question, hey, you know, did you realize this problem in the first place? They're like going, yeah, but that's the problem for the politicians.
Yes.
You know, they pass the ball to someone else again and again and again, and they expect me to pass the mic to them. But really, they could do something about it too, you know. And I found that frustration quite a bit. And the Oslo Desk was just kind of my way of trying to tackle this, but also I realized through my work, even though I did write these stories, I do get a lot of messages from people saying, I'm so glad you know, put a voice to the voiceless. And that kept me going. You know, it made me realize that the work I was doing was important enough to keep going, because at times, you know, I have those dips where I'm going, is this good enough? Am I doing something here? You know,
I don't have half of the megaphone that you do, but I feel that frustration where, you know, losing friends on a personal level, or the negative feedback online, you know, the sideways looks from people, and that can be so frustrating. But all of that gets turned around from just that one piece of feedback where someone says, thank you for talking, a voice to the voiceless, like you said. Thank you for giving a voice to the voiceless. That can turn all of that depression or that negative feeling or that hopeless feeling can be turned around with just that one little piece of feedback from one individual.
Yeah. So, you know, the Oslo Desk was started up with a lot of frustration, and also for me to continue my passion in journalism, actually. You know, I keep telling people I didn't really have like any heroic thing that I wanted to do. It was purely just, you know, I wanted to continue being a journalist, but I just couldn't find a way how. So I created that space for me to kind of do the stuff and to show that I can actually do it, you know.
And that is what attracted me to you and your work, is that you just said, you know, forget this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to fill that hole that I see in the media picture here in Norway. I think that's, excuse my French, it's ballsy, it's tough, it's innovative. Who do you have at your side helping you through this? Now, I know you're the boss there, but you probably have some good coworkers or employees rather, helping you along the way. What kind of a crew do you have?
Well, in the beginning, I was struggling a lot because I wasn't working in any big newsroom, so I don't have the, you know, decades of experiences behind me. So I needed an editor who could be able to guide me, to able to mentor me as I go along. And that's, after some frustration, I'm like, let's be vulnerable. I remember like Steve Jobs was saying, like, just go ask for help. So I went online on Facebook and I went to forums and it's like, guys, I've set this up. I need some help. I need some guidance. And then that was how I met Melanie Coffey. And I think you will love her, actually, because I'm
going to write that name down. See, remember the circle of friends?
She is so brilliant. She's been helping me out so much. So she worked for the Associated Press in the US for 2 decades, basically. So she's really became a reporter, and she's became an editor, and then she also covers some very hard hitting news, like the 9/11, say for example. And she was the one who's my mentor. She's been the one who really pushed me and guided me how to write even better with my articles. And she still is, she still, although she has a full-time job, but she would take time out to kind of guide me and trying to see this through, with me. So she's still on board, and she's helping me with as an advisor, and also helps me edit some very serious pieces like the Black Lives Matter movement. She kind of stepped in, she was there with me at the ground, because I said that, hey, look, the organizers decided to plan at 2 places, and I can't split myself in 2 places. I need some help here, guys. Yeah. So I kind of put that up on Facebook, and then Melanie was like, yes, I'll be there for you. I was like, beautiful. Great, thank you. So she was at the Stortinget site with a friend of mine, Andre. So he's the kind of video journalist guy. He's been doing a lot of the videos and everything, and he's been contributing so much of his time in the Oslo Desk because he believed in the work that we've been doing, and he's continuing to do that as well. And then we had sort of other friends who just kind of come in and then come out kind of thing. Yeah. They kind of like, okay, I can contribute to this. I can help you out.
So they're there when you need them.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of. So I would say, like, in my close network group, I have Melanie, Andre, and I have a very good friend of mine, Anthony, who's a professor in innovation and universal design. And, he's been following my work, and he understood the kind of more important part of the media. And he's been guiding me a little bit of what, he can help me out with, in terms of, say, the podcast. I had a lot of stuff I want to say on my mind. I said, oh, why don't we do a podcast season on this, where I interview you instead of you interviewing people. Yeah. It's like, okay, cool. If you feel like you can do that. So he was there. It's like, yeah, because I have so many questions. And I think the audience would also, who's been following you, have these kind of questions too. And I was like, okay, let's do that. So it's the team, like I have like very long committed people who's been helping me. So that's, Melanie, Andre, Anthony. And I would say I have a couple ones like Michael and Helena, seems to be helping me a little bit more frequently now. So they probably are more within the team. and then I have like these other, volunteers on the side, that they come in whenever they can. So I just been very lucky. I wish for me, I really wish that I can get enough revenue to kind of pay all of them, where we can actually really run as a newsroom, because we kind of been doing this on a project basis. Like, I'm applying for funding, and then once we get the funding, I'm able to pay them all. And sometimes I pay out of my own pocket money from my own salary to pay them to do some of the work for me, because they have their basic needs that they need to cover as well.
Sure.
So that's kind of the crew. And sometimes I kind of get people along, some of my friends, and I have like what I call strategic business partners, but they're like my friends, actually. They've been running their startups, they've been doing their things as well. I have a friend of mine who does marketing, and he's been helping me a lot in terms of guiding how do I get more traffic in social media, or doing video work. And it's someone that I can bounce ideas off. That's the most important thing of like in the creative process. Even for maybe people think like, there's no creativity when it comes to, creating a report, but there is actually.
Absolutely.
So in that process, I need someone to bounce those ideas off. So I have these people around me that, someone who's expertise in video, someone who's expertise in podcasts, someone who's expertise in text and in imagery. So I would just bounce off my ideas in that sense. So
I would think that the funding is a never-ending job. Who are your funders? Are they private funders, or is it basically just grants that you're getting from the Norwegian government? Can you talk about the struggle of financing?
So yeah, I would say most of the projects that we get funding is through either Fritt Ord, which is the Freedom of Speech Foundation here, that they support journalists projects and other general projects that goes within freedom of speech. And we were lucky enough at the conference about a month or so ago where we got funding there. We also get funding from also Comin. If we have a project that kind of goes into their criteria, and then we could do that. So that was about a few years back in 2018 where we got funding to, train, sort of do some basic training in journalism for refugees and immigrants.
Okay.
And that was pretty cool. It was my first time, and it was a bit stressful, but we got there. And then after a while, it's just picking out all these grants where you can apply and see which one works. Yeah. But most of it actually is my salary. So I have a part-time job, and I leave about 10% of my salary back into the company, so that that builds up. And then if I have enough, and then someone comes along who is very talented, and she or he shows up with really good work, then I say, you know what, I'm going to pay for this, and I can pay them a contribution to that. But yeah, it's been a struggle a lot, and people get a little bit shocked the fact that, oh, you're using your salary to pay people. It's like, yeah, of course, there's no way of doing that. So.
That's the cost of running a startup. It's not big dollars coming in from the get-go. It's something that has to be worked on, and you kind of build up to it. Now, you've been doing this for what, three years now?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 3 years.
3 years.
So in those 3 years, it's like I'm struggling as well. I need to get a job, to pay my own basic needs as well. So I was very lucky that over a year ago, I managed to get a part-time job, and it's a bit more stable now, so that I can, able to invest a part of that salary back into my company.
The company. Yeah.
And I hustle as well on the side, because it's a 50% position. So I hustle on the side for other projects. Some of them I was very lucky during COVID time, or just before the COVID hit us. We were approached by a lady who's a project leader of Erasmus, a European project. So it's an initiative on is a project between Germany, Sweden, and Norway, where they have an initiative called something around family education.
Okay.
So they wanted us to be part of that process of coverage of. They were going to have a conference here, and we were supposed to cover it, from our side of our lens. So it was nice, because it meant that we had the editorial independence, that we can really examine this family education initiatives that they have and how they approach education. So when I talk about family education, I mean like immigrants, like refugees coming over to a country, and there is a program from the government, yes, teaching them the language and how do they integrate into the society. So there's many initiatives in Norway, Sweden, and Germany at the time. So we did a podcast around that, and we were funded by the Erasmus program to do this. So yeah, it means that we're hitting some places. People are recognizing us, and I think like particularly when it came with the education, it was hitting us a bit more. And I think it might be because I was working at a period of time in something called the Oslo EdTech cluster, which is basically what they call sort of a group of businesses or startups that work around educational technology. Okay. So we were kind of in that space of understanding educational technology and the advancements that were going on here in Norway, but also because my frustration of the educational system itself is because
what is it that frustrates you?
It's again the same thing, the biasness, the way they teach like language, and how sometimes I find mainly the reason I had was teachers, how they taught me Norwegian. I had to go private actually at the time, but there were a couple episodes at this school that teaches immigrant Norwegian language where I had to take a break from my first teacher. He was really, really good because that was the time when I was handling my separation and I wanted to go back to England, but then that didn't happen. So I was trying to get back into the system to finish off my Norwegian classes. Yeah. And during that time, I got to meet one teacher. And I remember like I was just sitting there and then this girl came in and she was pregnant. obviously she, when you're pregnant, you're going to get tired. You're going to be a bit late to class.
Yeah.
I think you should just let it go type of thing, know. But this teacher was so rude and racist. I was unbelievable. She really. So the teacher walked past me, and the pregnant lady sat down very close to me. And so the pregnant lady was sitting down on the chair, and the teacher came running up to her, sort of walking swiftly up towards her, and then kind of stood in front of her and saying that you should not be late. She was pointing the finger at her in such a way that it was a very power dynamic that she had authority over her. Right. And that really made me angry. So I stood up and say, how can you say such a thing? I was so angry for her. Like,
good for you. Good for you.
and I literally stormed that class. I'm not attending this class with such a teacher. So I walked out. Ran to the reception at the bottom, and I said that I have a problem with this teacher and I need to change the teacher. This teacher had some issue. And then she was like, this receptionist was also biased. I've heard her say things, screaming at people, saying you're not good enough in Norwegian. So I knew what I was, she's not going to care what I'm going to say.
What kind of school is this? Oh my God. And they're supposed to be helping. This is an introductory course to make immigrants feel welcome.
Yeah, it's an introductory course, but it's also for those who were here on a family basis as well. So it was a combination of refugees and immigrants. Yeah. But it was so frustrating. So, and then I got okay, and I went to another teacher at the time, and I also got very frustrated. And I'm like going, I can't do this. And I went back to the receptionist. I'm like going, your teachers are really unbelievable. It's so arrogant of them to say certain things. And
it's so gutsy of you to say that. That's gutsy. Yeah.
So the receptionist looked at me going like, oh, but look at the results. All the teachers that we have, created really good results at the end. Like all the students are able to get, good grades to pass. I was like, but this is the thing, right? All of these students you're talking to are adults, and you don't think that they didn't put the effort themselves to actually get that A results or the results. Why are you saying that it's the teachers? Sure, the teachers has a combination, like a contribution to that result, but you're not recognizing the fact that the student has the motivation to do better too. And that really missed me.
I would think that these students were motivated to learn the language so they could learn how to cuss out their teachers in Norwegian.
Exactly.
This sounds like seriously, this sounds like a terrible place. But that right there is a perfect example of how it's not always this smooth transition from refugee status or immigrant status and into society here as a contributing member of the Norwegian society. That's not an easy path for a lot of people.
No, and
there's hindrances like that and many other things that we meet, and that is a story that needs to be told. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And because I witnessed that, and I was, it took me such a long time to kind of get over it. I remember I was so angry. I was writing this blog post on Facebook about that particular experience. And I remember people were supporting me and saying keep going and everything. But I was drained because I think,
it's tiring.
It is tiring. And I think I tell people if I had the chance to write my book, I would call it The Onion. Because my life is like an onion, really. If you cut through it, it's often like one story after another, a lot of sort of drama, but it's kind of life experiences. So let me just explain why that is. Because
please.
My mother got really sick at the end of the year of my final year in university. So she had something called motor neuron disease, ALS. Okay. So she only had about 2 to 5 years life expectancy after diagnosis. And also my mother was abusive. So I had a lot of my friends going, how can you take care of your mother who abused you? And I'm like, that's kind of
physical abuse, mental abuse,
a duty.
I'm sorry?
Both.
Okay. Yeah.
Both. Yeah. So physical and mental. So then I had to, and that was at a time where I met my daughter's father, and, we're actually engaged, but then we kind of was off. And then it was kind of like my whole entire life seemed to collapse at that time. And by the time my mother passed away, I found out I was pregnant, and my family didn't want me to keep the baby.
You were in England at this time, right?
Yeah, this was in England at the time when that happened. And that was when I decided that I'll move over here to Norway then, because I feel like I had my daughter's father's support and his family's support. But not long afterwards, I realized that he left me for another woman, which meant that I had to deal with being.
But you had
stuck
already
here.
moved here. You had already moved here by then.
Yeah, I moved here.
Boy.
I gave birth to my daughter, and that was about a year or so after my daughter was, born. And it was such a turmoil time. And so when I have all these accumulation and then I'm like, okay, now I have the separation to deal with and I can't return back home because of the international laws and everything. And then I'm like, okay, then I need to kind of pick myself up and I need to go and learn Norwegian. I need to get a job now. I need to get a job. But I didn't expect that going back into the Norwegian language system was going to be hit by this type of biasness and this episodes of me,
Let me ask you just for a purpose of timeline. What year was this when you realized you were pregnant and you had moved to Norway?
That was in 2010.
2010. Okay.
So my mother passed away in December 2010, and that was the time that I also realized that I was pregnant.
Okay.
And then I moved to Norway in 2011 around March, very early in the year.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So yeah,
it's a lot of challenges, a lot of changes, a lot of adjustments to be made.
Yeah, in a very, very short time.
In
it's
a
like
very
5,
short
6
time,
years.
all at once. Yeah.
I remember like screaming to my friends, like, I hope this stops now. I remember screaming to people like, God, I have no idea what you're trying to put me through, but this has to stop now. I don't think I can take it anymore. So,
but isn't it interesting that so many times in my life anyway, where I think this is it, I can't take anymore, and then all of a sudden I'm taking more. It's growth. You grow through. You add another layer to the onion.
Exactly.
You rise to the occasion. Of course, everyone has their struggles, and some people don't rise out of their struggles into a better situation. But it looks like you've done exactly that.
I hope so. I mean, like, it's not to say that I don't feel extremely down. I do suffer from depression, anxiety. So sometimes it hits me really badly, and my mind
how do you deal with
starts
that?
spinning.
And how do you deal with it when that happens?
Well, I take some time off. I literally tell, if I know like it's getting really bad, then I tell people around me that I can't deal with this, like the projects I'm doing, because I have a lot of projects running at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I said I need at least a week off. I have gone to the DPS system. So the DPS system here is basically you go to your GP and then you try to get a therapist and all that. So that was the system there. But I found like having been through the system, it doesn't always help because I find that there's another layer to this. The therapists are also slightly biased or don't have the global competence and aren't able to help me. So I feel like I have to save myself here.
Have you had male therapists or female therapists or both? And do you notice a difference?
I usually go for female.
Okay.
I don't go for male.
No.
Because I don't think a guy would truly understand what I've gone through unless it's a woman, I think. And I just feel more comfortable with female therapists in general. I did actually find a very good one, but she was a private one. So I actually kind of went through a few sessions with her, and then I had to say, sorry, I just really don't have any more money left.
It's so expensive.
It is. And even the DPS is cheaper, but the quality is quite different sometimes. So I'm still struggling now to really figure out, should I go to private now since I have this, part-time job, or should I go through the DPS system and trust the system again? But yeah.
When you're in the middle of periods of anxiety and depression, does the fact that you own a startup, and specifically the type of startup that you do, it's a news organization, does that help to pull you out of those periods of anxiety and depression, or does the fact that you have this project, this business, this startup, does that pull you further down? Maybe I'm depressed, I'm tired, and I have so much work that I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm not doing it.
That's really, really good question, actually, John.
I'm a decent podcast host.
You are, John. So the thing was, it's like the startup actually pulled me down. I'll tell you the reason why. It's not so much as, it is a very good mission that I wanted to take part in. But the fact is, what I didn't realize what I was experiencing only until about a year or so after, when I went to the US. I managed to get a scholarship to go to the US to attend a conference. So the conference was an intersection between diversity, technology, and was it diversity, journalism, and technology. Yeah. So that's sort of those 3 points there. And they had a really interesting workshop that I attended. And it's from the DART Center. Now, the DART Center is a center for journalists who have to cover trauma or going through trauma themselves. And I didn't realize that the amount of stories that I was covering, especially around refugees and immigrants, and so I was experienced that what they call secondary depression, which that the tragedies were coming over and over, that it has an impact on me mentally. So when I had that workshop, I realized that I wasn't taking care of my mental health because I was just kept pushing, and I was kind of spiraling out of control in my mind. So then when I came back and I, continued to push on with a couple of investigation that I was doing, but then I had to take a year off. So I did take a year off from my startup. Wow. Because I realized that in those 5 or so years, I was covering nonstop tragedy after tragedy. And even though I wanted to find a solution, there was no solution being provided. There was no one there helping the challenges that I was trying to write about. So basically I took some time off, and that was how I got this part-time job, and had to not switch, but it's kind of took a bit of a break from covering this side of things. I ended up covering about plastic pollution instead, environmental stuff. So
that's an interesting thing to think about, that reporting on trauma or being involved with other people's trauma can actually bring trauma on oneself. And that's something that I've kind of felt on me with my work as a police officer before. I worked with Barnevern for several years, Child Welfare Services for those non-Norwegians. And even now with my podcast, on some of the people I've spoken with. And then you start to, unless you're a robot, when you speak with people like that, you take some of that in and you reflect on it and you apply some of that to your own life. And it can be, there's a reflective quality to other people's trauma. If you have any kind of sympathy, empathy, heart, you're going to feel some of that. So I would imagine when you're doing that time after time, day after day, case after case, as a journalist, there is an effect. There is treatment that probably has to be considered, treatment or therapy, at the very least, talking about these things with someone. But then you're bound by certain confidentiality and ethical restraints that you can't really talk about everything. So there's the dilemma. How
do you deal with that, actually? I'm curious, obviously you've been in that situation. How did you deal with it yourself? So
for years, I didn't deal with it. I was a police officer during an age where the psychological fallout on police officers was not, we kind of had our own in-house gallows humor. And that was kind of our way with deal. And I'm not saying every day was a tragedy and trauma, but there were things that happened. But we would just joke about it and with that gallows humor, and then just kind of move along. You just kind of had to tough it out. So that was the age when I was a police officer. It was during that age. So a lot of those things I just didn't deal with. But then there's also things in my past, pre-police officer. I was in the U.S. Marines. There's family issues and things like that. And again, for years, I just didn't deal with it. And I think the main catalyst now I had started to think on these things and deal with these things before this catalyst occurrence. But I think it was when I lost my son in November 2019. I lost him to a heroin overdose. That is when I really started thinking, man, you've got to work through these things. Such a tragic background. I was separated from my son for years because of moving here. I didn't have to be separated from him because I moved here, but I wasn't the only parent. I'll just leave it at that. And when I lost him, of course, that pushed me. I mean, I dive bombed into a depression, a period of uncertainty. I just didn't know what to do and how to deal with that, because this happened in the middle of that relationship being repaired with my son, and then he overdoses like that. And that's actually the thing that pushed me into doing this podcast, because I started thinking, how do I deal with this? I didn't know how to I still don't know how to deal with that. And my wife, my Snoopy, as I call her, she told me, she says, why don't you start talking to people who, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically is, why don't you start talking to people who inspire you or who motivate you? Or why don't you, find ways to tackle these issues head on? And that caused me to start this podcast and invite people who do exactly that, inspire me, motivate me, or, people who, mental health experts, people like yourself who rise and meet the challenge and progress through life, because I wasn't progressing through life. I was depressed and I wasn't doing anything. So I would say that this podcast and the conversations I have with people like yourself, that's my medicine. Now, I still don't know how to deal with the loss of my son. I still have things that I need to work through, but having conversations like this you inspire the heck out of me. You motivate the heck out of me. I want to spread my podcast out so that it can be a catalyst for change for people. And I'm not saying I'm some kind of a guru, but I'm hoping that the conversations I have with people can stimulate creativity, stimulate and motivate people who are listening, because that's what I needed when I lost my son. And instead of sitting passively, I was motivated by my wife to be active in finding that motivation and inspiration and new ways of thinking. So this is my pill. This is my therapy. This is my medicine against that desire. And it is a desire still to be depressed and unmotivated and just sit around and do nothing.
I think I resonate with that, because there are stories that I covered where, it's really interesting to see the decisions people make at a time of darkness.
Yes.
There are so many undocumented refugees or immigrants that I've covered and got to meet on a day-to-day basis, because it was a documentary photography. So I was with them a lot. I was literally sitting on the streets with them. I was trying to understand their mentality, and I got to meet one. It was interesting because there was one who was on a hunger strike. He didn't get his rights, and he's basically living in a prison in Norway. He is not able to return back to Iran, but he's stuck here basically. And then he has these bunch of friends around him who are all undocumented. And I got to meet some of his friends. And one of them was really interesting for me, because the way he talks to me, it's not this, I'm going to keep going, even though I get so many rejections.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times he's got rejected. I think it must have been like, God knows, 50, 60. These were high numbers when he's telling me. But then the way he was trying to survive, he wasn't, he showed up, quite cleaned up and everything. It wasn't like, very shabby or anything. Yeah. It was really like this resilience that I got to see in him. And that really, really inspired me. And to this day, it kind of reminds me of those people who really have nothing. And I remind myself that fact that I'm very lucky. I have a roof above my head. I have a passport and everything. I shouldn't take these things for granted, but he was working black, he needs to sustain himself. and he just kept going in and out.
Let me just interrupt. For my American listeners, working black means working under the table. Just so they understand. He's a black guy. Of course, he's working black.
Yeah, we call him working black over here. Yeah. I know pretty much the spots where people work black, and I have no problems with that, to be honest with you, because I think that if the government can't help them,
these people are trying to survive.
Exactly. I have nothing wrong with it, because I get really annoyed when I see newspaper covering this. It's like, oh, this is bad and everything. Yes, in some cases it is, because they don't have the rights. If they need protection, they're not going to get protection. But the problem is their status. They don't have a status in Norway. Yeah. So what can you do? Okay, they beg on the streets. So then what happens? People were begging on the streets, and then the Norwegian government decided that, we should have a ban. People should not be begging along the streets. So you're kind of really pushing them over the edge. Yeah. Do you want them to kill themselves at the end of the day? Because that's how I felt, because I've met these people. I've seen these people, how they struggle on the streets. There were times and again where they're sleeping on the streets and they get their stuff stolen. And they have to start all over again.
That is a huge traumatic and tragic event. Think about that. You're living on the streets and everything you have is gone.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to start all over again. And of course, there are charity organizations out there helping them, with food and some of the basic needs, but they don't have anything stable. They're going from one place to another. And sometimes I think back on those stories and go like, that resilience needs to be told. I need to say, I need to I'm a kind of an active person at a point where I get really, really depressed. At one point, I'm like, I need to take one action. And often it's just me going out there writing or talking to people.
And that lifts you out of depression.
It does. Even though the stories I cover makes me sad, but it also lifts me at the same time.
I get that. Yeah, and that's the whole thing with my podcast. It's making me It's making me stay active. It's putting me. Yeah, I'm out there. I'm doing something. Otherwise, I would just be sitting on the couch being depressed about losing my son. Yeah. Which that then leads to being depressed about other things, maybe things that I haven't thought about in years. Depression leads to more depression if you let it. If you stay in that state of mind long enough, you're going to get depressed about more things than the thing you're actually depressed about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, I have recurring sort of PTSD. So sometimes episodes from the past of my childhood disrupts me. From the
abuse?
Yeah. It was kind of weird because so just about a month or so ago, I had such an episode, something that I didn't even recall, but it was a flashback that came right at me and it paralyzed me. And I realized that I need to sit with it. I need to, run through that point in my life again and wondering what I was feeling and how I can kind of get past it, because sometimes you need to go through it to actually really progress. And I think that was the point that it was a kind of strange. It was something strange because I remember it was a time when I went extremely angry with my mom at that point. And she was trying to walk out. She was quite emotional and manipulative, and she wanted me to act in a certain way. Yeah. And I remember she stormed out the house and she was trying to stand in the middle of the road. Now I stayed at home. It was something that I've sort of forgotten about. It just came back up, and I remember I had to make the decision whether to go out after her or stay at home, because I knew this is another thing that she was trying to get sympathy from me, but also to kind of control me in this sort of way and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself type of thing. And I'm I was around, I don't know, 20 or something, 19, 20, maybe 21 at the time. And then I remember my sister and my brother ran after her, but I stayed at home. I decided that I'm going to stay put because I knew that she wasn't really going to do it, because she's done it so many times. It was just open threats. Yeah. But I didn't want her to feel like she had any control of me. If I had walked out of that house of ours, she would know I got her.
Got her.
Yeah.
Still
but I didn't want to do
thumb.
that. So yeah, exactly. So it was strange that this piece of history in my past and my memory came back up again. And I started really thinking, digesting it through and going, okay, maybe it's something that I need to remind myself that I've gone through something. I I overcame it. Now I just need to keep going. And so it's just it's stuff like that happens now and then with me, that I do collapse. I actually had, after the separation, I was extremely depressed for at least a couple of years. I was literally bedbound. Let's put it that way. I did help my daughter. I was able to do the functional stuff. With my daughter, when my daughter's back with me, I take her to school, and then I come back, make her food and everything. But majority of the time when she's at school, I'm at home in bed. And that was a time when my landlady, she was extremely worried. I remember she literally came up one day, and she literally kind of went into my bedroom without. She was knocking, but she was extremely worried that I was do something bad with myself. And then she sat on the side of my bed and saying, "Hey, I see you always in bed. What are you doing? How are you and everything?" And I was like, going, "Yeah, I just need to just sleep. I don't want to do anything right now." And then she told me a story about her husband. At that point, she said that, the reason why I came to see you is because I don't want this to happen again. And I said, huh? It's like, my husband killed himself, so it's like, oh, okay. And it kind of got to the point where I wasn't even suicidal. I mean, those thoughts did come to mind, but I had my daughter, and I don't want to, and that is a force, that kind of keeps me going. And so when she said that to me, I realized that maybe I'm actually spiraling out of control, in the sense that I'm not able to get back up again. Yeah. It's been about a year now, and she's really worried. Yeah. And obviously I managed, obviously I was, I had support from the NAV system. So they were paying the rent and everything. So I think I was kind of lucky in that sense, because I was able to collapse. Had I not had that support, then I had to keep going. But I had that year or so to kind of really collapse. But I kind of picked myself up again, very slowly.
But you're talking about a pretty solid year of constant depression.
Yeah.
That's a long time to be depressed and inactive.
Yeah, it was. And I try to pick myself up now and then, but it was hard. I was seeing a therapist at the time. I think I must have been a couple of therapists because I changed. But I'm still trying to wonder how I got out of it, to be honest with you. But it was such a long time, and I realized it was a time where my head was processing everything.
Sure,
and I think my mind was needing that time, because it was like, near the end of my university years, I was confronting my mother's, abusiveness, and I was the very first in the family who confronted her and left home, and lived outside, and then it escalated to the point where she was focusing her abuse to my siblings. And then I had to kind of go back home. So this was an episode where I got a call around 4 or 5 in the morning, and it's from my aunt in Hong Kong. And she was telling me on the phone, like, you need to go home now. I was like, why? What's wrong? It's like, your mother's in hospital. I was like, why is my mom in hospital? It's like, your father, pushed her and hurt her. And so I was like, well, how did that came about? It's like, because your mother picked up a knife, a kitchen knife, to hurt your brother, and your father stopped her because my brother was standing on my side. And I realized,
oh boy.
Oh yeah. And that was when I was in a student hall at the time, and I said, I didn't want to go back, but I had to do it for my siblings, because I realized that whatever I was feeling at the time, I need to go back. And so when the call was off, I was kind of mentally preparing myself what I need to say and what I need to do, because in our culture, if you are apologizing to your parents, you kneel down with a cup of tea, saying, I'm sorry. It's kind of a tradition thing, to say you're sorry. So I knew that was something I needed to do. So as soon as I got back there, I went on my knees. I took a cup of tea and I told my mother I was sorry for being disobedient and everything, even though inside of me I didn't believe I was. But that was just to keep the peace in the family, because at least she feel like she won a little bit, And I've been doing that, every night I would go back for dinner and I go back to my student hall and trying to finish up my very final year at university. So
I wanted to ask, how did this affect your schooling at that time? Were you able to stay focused and finish your schooling in the time that you had originally allotted for that, or did the whole schooling process get extended because you had to deal with things at home?
It did affect me. It was very hard to focus. A lot of the
but it didn't extend the length of your schooling?
No, I didn't want it to, because I was actually already tired of university. I was very much that I just want to get this over and done with. Yeah. I didn't want to extend another year because it meant that I'll be in debt again. So
that speaks comparatively. See, because I'm comparing my situation with you, and I knew I was right in thinking that you are someone who can motivate me and inspire me, because I had a similar situation. I had a full scholarship to play football, not soccer, but American football. And I gave that up after the first 2 years because of trouble at home. And I thought that I would be able to I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I would be able to help. Turns out I didn't. Parents still got divorced and things still happened. But looking back on that, I mean, I did what I thought was right, but I wish I would have just realized. I don't think I had the maturity to understand that was their issue in their marriage, and there was nothing. It didn't have anything to do with me. There was nothing I could do. So I'm comparing the situations there, and
I mean,
I think
it's
a hard decision to make at that age. But I see that you had even at that age, and even with all of the stress of going to school, you still had the awareness and the maturity to keep your focus on your schooling in spite of what was happening at home. That's admirable.
Yeah, I guess like for me, like
at least let's agree that you were tougher with your situation than I was with mine.
I think like for me, it's always a balance of what I'm going to lose. One of the things I didn't want to lose was a potential career that I had that could get me out of the situation.
Yes.
One of the things that I think what also drummed into me was I lived in a very poor situation. We were poor. My parents saved up a lot of money for us to go to a private school.
Okay.
And
what kind of work did they do?
They worked in a takeaway. So this is very typical of a lot of British-born Chinese. So the parents own a takeaway and then you live above it. So that was kind of how it is. Yeah. So it's not like a lot of money all the time. They work long hours, and
they owned the restaurant.
Yeah, it's like a takeaway. Okay. It's not so much as a restaurant. It's just like one of those when you come into the counter, you buy your stuff and you leave.
But your parents owned it.
Yes, my parents owned it. Yeah. So So for me, it was this, and even now, like I'm in a situation in my personal life where I'm looking at how much I'm going to lose. So I do have a personal, thing going on right now, and I know I have all these projects, and I have my work. How much am I going to lose with that work? Because I'm freelancing, so every hour of my work counts towards paying my bills. So even though I'm saying, okay, I'm going to allow myself, these 3 days or this 1 week, it means that I'm able not to work at those hours, like in this 1 week, to take care of myself. But the next week I must come back up again and keep working because I need to earn the money.
How do you work through that? Do you have a schedule where you say, I'm going to work my butt off for a month and then I'm going to take 5 days off? Or do you just keep working until you pretty much can't anymore, and then you're kind of forced to take a break? How do you arrange that for yourself?
Yeah, so I try to actually put a lot of breaks in my work life anyway. I schedule in just listen. I would actually be having 1 hour and I'll listen to the same song over and over again. I'll be on the sofa or something, on my desk. I'll just listen to the same song over.
I'm going to send you a Spotify link to one of my songs. You can listen to me sing for you.
Okay. So I do that because it regulates my emotions as well. It kind of gives me that headspace to kind of, work through whatever was on my mind and just kind of be myself at that point. But I haven't been able to do that because I had so much stuff going on, and I realized that I was getting irritated about a lot of different things. And that was the point where, just like you said, it's like this point where my body and my mind cannot deal with anything more, and I have to force a break.
Yeah.
I have to force at least a week break, and then, say I'll be back on again in the following week to kind of get back into. So I'm often looking at the situation, and often I actually have these lists. Like every year I have a list of personal goals that I say I want to reach them because I need to reach them.
Yeah.
And if I have any personal problems or anything that kind of comes in the obstacle as a way, then I often look back at that list again and going, how do I get there? How do I get there from A to B? What do I need to take care of now?
So it's a constant reevaluation of tasks that you have to do to tasks that you had planned to do, and you just it ebbs and flows. You're not stuck. Your calendar is fluid. In other words.
Absolutely. And yeah, because I have a lot of these projects going on, and so sometimes I feel like I feel guilty that I kind of haven't fulfilled my duties on some of these projects, but I also explain to them, because I think at the end of the day, I want to live a very balanced life. I want to be happy. I want to be able to have the energy to keep going.
Yes.
But if you are coming in with the empty vessel, if you don't have the energy, you're not actually contributing to anything. So there's no point in me to feel guilty about it, because I know, like, okay, if I have a boss or if I have someone in the group saying, hey, but, I know you got the personal things, but, you need to still going. We still need you, Comin. We still need it. I always say, no, I'm sorry, because I'm not contributing anything in this project if I don't sort myself out right now.
See, and that's a hard lesson to learn. I fell into that trap. There was a time a few years ago where I owned 3 gyms up in northern Norway. We were living up north at the time, and they were spread out over like maybe 5 hours driving time. And I enjoyed the work, and I just worked and worked and worked. And all of a sudden, and I'm not talking, it was something that I built up to, just all of a sudden I couldn't work anymore. I was burnt out. I mean, I hit a brick wall, and it's like, okay, I can't do this. I've got to put in some time towards and a funny thing is owning 3 gyms, and yet I had no time to train. Isn't that something? I was in the worst shape of my life at that time when I owned those gyms. But it was a lesson that I had to learn, that I had to I had to plug in some planned relaxing time, and I kind of would do that where I would work as long as I had to, as much as I had to, for 2 weeks. And then I would take 3 days off and just be available by telephone for clients and employees. But it's a lesson that I think a lot of startup people and a lot of self-employed people have to learn. You've got to put in that me time, that relaxation time. I sent you a text, by the way, while we were talking.
Oh, you did?
Yep. That's a link to one of my songs. You can use that to relax.
Cool. I will listen to this. That's really nice. I'm often out for looking at some, listen to new songs. I feel like, I don't know, I'm not really into the popular songs. I'm often looking for those gems, I need to really discover them, Sometimes I discover them, so I'm like, that'd be good.
Check me out. I've got 4 singles out there. I sent you one of them. You go ahead and check them out.
I will do.
A little self-promotion. Who else is going to promote me? I got to do it myself. So
of course, and I think like this is the thing with self-promotion as well. I think people get it wrong sometimes, because when I've seen people react to people self-promoting themselves, and people are like, oh, they're just showing off, they're just bragging or something like that. But I think, like, why can't you come to the perspective of, say, wow, he's done something?
Yes.
Because if you know the creative process, it's really hard to say you got an idea and then execute it. It's 2 different things. And I find like people who often say, oh, they're just bragging about something. Sometimes it is. It could be is. Sometimes I find like there are times when I'm like, is it necessary to say this? But then again, it's like, this is your achievement, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's only bragging. Bragging is a negative thing. Self-promotion is a positive thing. And I think it's only bragging when you're talking about achievements that don't really exist. And some people do that. But if you have achieved something, and if you are dependent on your achievements bringing you an income,
Exactly.
than self-promote away. I mean, just, go for it, talk about it, and push it out there and promote it, because it's what sustains you financially. So
And it's for people to know who you are too.
yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
how people know. It's like, there's a project that I'm working on called She Witness, and it is dealing. I'm working with 2 other NGOs dealing with domestic violence, and I decided to go out with my story. Having a mother who was abusive and everything. There were, feedbacks were like, "Are you sure you want to display yourself out like that?" And I'd be like, "Well, I don't see why I cannot, because what
It's
I'm
your
trying
story.
to say
Yeah.
is my story at the same. I'm owning my story, and also I'm saying that, I'm working on this project because I've gone through it, but it doesn't make me less. It doesn't make me less competent. It doesn't make me feel like I would take things too personal, because that's the problem. Like, you still have people with a mindset that because it happened to you, you cannot deal with that particular challenge, that issue, and you want to tackle it. And I say that's completely wrong.
Yeah.
And it's purely because I've gone through it. I have a different perspective than, say, someone who's not gone through it and decided to set up a project on this. Like, hey, I just out of the blue, I wanted to tackle domestic violence now, but why? The question is.
I think people respond to the personal story. I think people respond to me talking about my son dying from a heroin overdose. It's not uncomfortable for me at all to speak about that. I thought it would be. But the first time I mentioned it on my podcast, it's like, hey, I'm just telling my story. Maybe once people hear that story and they see or hear how I'm dealing with it, that might inspire somebody. That might save somebody's life.
Exactly.
So, yeah, self-promotion, telling the story, telling the personal things. I think I have to wait until a couple of family members die before I get into details about my childhood and all that stuff. but I am a believer in putting oneself out there in a constructive way, because you never know whose life you're going to touch. You never know whose life you can save by telling your story of trauma, whether it's depression or anxiety or losing a loved one, whatever it may be. It does no harm to tell one story.
No, and I was attracted to your story, actually. That's kind of how we met, right? because because that was when in Mountiful you had that event coming up, and there was just like this graphic card that talked about you, and I was reading through that, and I found that, wow, what an amazing person here. He must have gone through.
I didn't even hear. I didn't even see what it was. I submitted a few bullet points to Rawa, but I don't know what she used and what she wrote. So.
Well, it wrote about like your background in the sense that you were from the U.S. You joined the police force, and you worked with childcare services, child welfare services, and then it also mentioned the fact that your son died of heroin in 2019. Yeah. And I was like, wow, okay. And then the next part of it was like, oh, you have this podcast and you did, looking for inspiration and all this type of thing. And I thought, you're a really interesting person, but also I realized that you've gone through something, and I want to know, as in the same way as you were trying to get motivation and inspiration, I also learn from people who've gone through tough things as well. Yeah. Because it kind of, because you hear my story, like, I've gone through this, but it doesn't mean that I won't fall again. And when I fall again, sometimes I forget,
That's
that I've gone through something.
That's a good point to make. People talk about, you must have gone through a few things. You said that just now, but yes, but I'm still going through. Some of those things are not resolved yet. And that's what's a little exciting and very scary. A little exciting, but very scary. But that scariness, I thrive on a challenge. I thrive on the challenge of finding out how to deal with some of these things.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's relatable to a lot of people, but I do thrive on that challenge at the same time as it's heavy, at the same time as maybe that's why I'm a power lifter. Maybe that's why. I just figured something out.
I think I realize, like, with life, it's like, how much of the weight can you carry? Because I realize that everyone that I know has gone through something, some kind of baggage, something that was quite tragic in their life and everything. And how do you sort of rise above it in a certain way, but is kind of like, how do you cope with it? Because there's something that I've often asked myself, because I've gone through so many different things and I'm still trying to figure out, like this PTSD moments, and I'm like completely like, oh, I thought I resolved that, and then it's come back again, and it's like, okay, maybe there's something that's unresolved inside of me and it's not the part, or maybe there's a trigger during that week and then I didn't realize it and it just came back again. So it's constantly trying to, figure out. And I think that there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out.
Yes.
I think a lot of people, like, we're kind of moving away from like, okay, I want a 9-to-5 job, I want to have the stable home and everything. But it's really now a very personal development, very mindful of who you are and who you want to be. Because I think, like, especially when you look at a lot of the suicidal rates, and it's amongst the younger generation, I think it's just that they're losing a certain purpose, and they may have gotten a lot of things. I think that there is something there, why we're getting there, because even with me at my age, I'm still trying to figure out, like, what is the purpose in my life, and, why is the meaning? Because it's very easily to kind of go down the slippery slope, because, I just flicked in, the news on my Facebook. Everything was so sad and tragic. Yeah. It got me really depressed. I actually literally had to switch it off at one point, because it's like, the problem is so much bigger than myself in knowing how to fix that. There's nothing I can do there, So.
Well, what I find myself doing, and I don't know if it works, I guess it works for me because it makes me feel good. I look at the news and I see, yes, there is a lot of ugliness out there. There's a lot of depressing stuff going on. But my thought is, what can I infuse or inject into that will give people hope? And there is another important aspect of my podcast, the things I talk about and the people who I talk with. I'm hoping that it will give hope, not just to me, but to anyone who may be listening. Yeah, so it's an ugly world out there, but there's also a lot of beauty. And what are we doing as individuals to bring that beauty to light, so that not only that we can see it more clearly, but so that others who are just looking at the darkness might see that bright little, beautiful little person, or that beautiful little incident, or this example of humanity. Yeah.
No, exactly. Like, it's why I go towards constructive journalism, because that kind of grounds me back again to this hope and everything. It kind of allows me, like, okay, where is the other side of the story of this that could be good, and there's something else I wanted to say. I think it was, as a journalist, we often have to face sadness and tragedy and, be a witness. That's something I want to say. We are a witness to the stuff that's happening in the world and society that often is bad. And I think when you say you're a powerlifter, I think that's kind of where we are. We kind of have to face these, because we know, like, if no one else is facing it, we are the ones who could actually face it and actually be able to lift other people out from that. Because over the years, when I have been very open about my own story and, how I got out of depression and things like that, I do have a younger generation of girls coming towards me and saying, how did you do it? And I would have a coffee session with them. And I realized that
you're mentoring them. Yeah.
It's in some ways it is. And it's they, because I never really even thought about that, because I really wanted to tell people, this is what I've gone through. This is what I'm still struggling, but I overcame it, and this is where I'm heading. I honestly don't really anticipate anything afterwards. It was only until there are moments where people were coming up to me and they're asking me loads of questions about how I overcame things. Yeah. And which is why your podcast is important, because people are looking for these answers too. I truly believe that to be the case. So I think it's a combination of everything, is that we are continuously working on this challenge and looking at the good in the world and looking for hope. And we're trying to tell people that there are a certain group of people who are trying to do good. Yeah. And I think, like, for me, the wonderful thing, like, working part-time at this ocean plastic company, is that I really see a big energy force of people pulling together to try and sort out this plastic pollution. It's amazing. It's not that
what's the name of that organization?
It's called Ogoori.
Ogoori, yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually the name came from a Japanese sailor who was lost at sea like the longest time ever. And
I was
according
just
to
gonna say that sounded very familiar. I lived on Okinawa for 2 years, and I really dove into more specifically the Okinawan history, but of course also the mainland Japanese history, and that sounds familiar. And yes, I'm familiar with that story. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how the inspiration of this story came from, because
Beautiful.
this guy returned back, right? So we're saying like the plastic that's gone into sea is going to return back to us as humanity, and capturing that plastic, making sure that plastic doesn't enter back into the ocean again, and so that was something that they were dealing stuff on a systemic level, that really something that I really like, because even with my journalism work, I'm dealing with things on a systemic level. Yes. I'm just not looking at the symptoms. I don't want to care too much about the symptoms of what's happening in society. Like, okay, there are loads of youth crime, but I want to understand like why is that, and then keep asking the why. There's this really, really good exercise, the 7 whys, because when you get to the 7th why, you probably get to the real cause of what is really happening.
Yeah.
And
but
that's
people
what
don't have patience. People have patience maybe for the first why.
Exactly.
So how do we overcome that? Because people are just looking at the surface of a lot of social issues and political issues. And again, they don't have the patience for 7 whys, barely patience for the first. What do we do? How do we?
I think it's like, especially as storytellers like us, we have the power in us to actually understand all the whys, and then telling that story back to them in the best way possible. We know video is very good. We know graphics are very good. We know infographics are very good. And it's continuously creating those content to push out to get people to understand, because people don't have... they all have a very short span, but you can still say a lot in this short span. Fox, not Fox as in Fox News, but VOX, Fox. They've been doing a lot. Been doing a lot of these explainer videos that are extremely good. Usually they're under about 7 minutes long and explaining the whole entire system and everything. And I think we need more of that. Yeah. I think like if we can have a lot more funding that goes into storytellers or doing like these explainer videos, these informative things, I think we're at a better place. I'm a little bit harsh, I think, when it comes to democracy, I must admit, because I'm realizing that for democracy to truly happen and democratic process to really truly happen, everyone must have similar knowledge. We must be on the same page when it comes to knowledge, but that is lacking. And I'm seeing that continuously in UK and here. And the reason why people vote is ridiculous. It's on an emotional basis.
Look at the political situation in the United States. You have, Republicans make up less than 30% of the electorate. However, among Republicans, over 70% of them don't believe that Joe Biden truly won the presidency. And that right there, I believe, is because there are two completely different sources of information. There's two completely different interpretations of what is true. It's
Absolutely.
amazing. It's amazing.
It's polarization, because if you look at media, that is what it does. Because with personalized ads and everything, they in media and social media, and they can tell whether you are right wing lenient or left wing lenient, and then they would push these contents towards you. So maybe you're just about on the right side of politics, but they're going to push you even further to the right side. Yeah. And it's, Cambridge Analytica, one of the best investigation that came out, recently, talks about this, why we need to really have strict regulation in terms of media. And I'm going to really see how this plays out, because I know recently the government has, especially in Norway, has written something called the Handlingsplan mot rasisme. And in there is a section about media and how politicians, should not be spreading hate. But how does that play out? Really? Because I'm still seeing, we still have Sylvia Listau still talking a lot of crap in social media about her policies regarding immigration and refugees. And if people keep telling me like, oh, this is just, we need to look at this, I've said, yeah, but she's looking at it through the lens of hate.
Yes.
She's looking at the lens of xenophobia.
Some of the things that she says, I can't believe that she has the guts to say it, because it's so obviously hateful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is normalized. So you're basically creating so much polarization. We need to stop that. So one of the things that with the Oslo Desk is that we're trying to figure out how we can minimize that. I mean, even for me, I had this really interesting story, and I got to sit down with a Trump voter actually here in Oslo many years back. And it was an extremely interesting conversation, extremely interesting, because most people hate Trump voters. They can't even stand Trump voters. They can't try. But for me, I really want to get into the heads. I want to understand. So if you get someone from the FRP party to sit in front of me, I want to understand what made you tick.
Yes.
Why did you get to that point, really choosing a politician who represents so much hate, really?
Yeah.
And when I was sitting down with this Trump voter, he was he was with the Marines. He's been fighting in Afghanistan. He's quite patriotic, and but he's really smart.
Yeah,
he's not stupid as many people think like Trump voters are. They're really smart people.
Sure.
But what he had was he was frustrated with the system. He was frustrated that the system was still going slow. It doesn't matter which politician from which side coming up, things were not changing. And Trump came with a personality that really looked like he was going to make things happen, because he's so radical. He's unlike any of the politicians, which I can't understand that attraction, because we live in quite a hierarchical society, very elitist, even amongst the journalism and news industry. My God, it's very hard for me to kind of come in, because I may be not as articulate. I do swear occasionally. So it's like, I'm not that kind of portrayal of what many people think. I'm trying to break those boundaries, because, when you see a woman swear, they often think like, oh, she's the angry Asian woman or the black woman. But I'm like, I want to push that just a little bit just to see how you react.
Yeah.
But then it's like, and then it's those type of things. It's like, okay, once that, we did have some commonalities. We both of us want to have a better society, but the way we go about it is quite different.
Yes.
And I told him about my values. I said that the reason why I can't vote for Trump is how he dealt with those children. How did he dealt with them at those camps? And many children died. And I, as a mother, as a woman, I cannot be okay with those politicians. I can understand how you feel. And I think that is the conversation we must have with a lot of these people from that far side, I think, because I do think a lot of them may have gone through something.
Sure.
And it's really need to get to them. And also there should be a mandate on a national basis in each country that we really need to do better in our educational system. We need to do better in media. We need to do better at holding people accountable. If you're trolling and you're saying like, I'm going to rape you, I'm going to they need to be in jail. I don't care.
Absolutely.
We need to be really, really harsh with these, because I think, as parents, we put boundaries. We put boundaries to our children, telling them what is right and wrong in society, and what they're doing, their behavior. It's the same thing. We need to put those boundaries, those rules down, even if you're an adult.
But a lot of people on the right have gotten to this stage where anytime you try to put boundaries on anything, they claim that it's the cancel culture or that it's infringing upon free speech. I find that the focus should be on beating down that way of looking at it. Because maybe it's not the cancel culture. Maybe it should be the consequence culture. If you say and do certain things, then this, that, or the other is going to happen. There's going to be a consequence. And free speech doesn't mean that you can say whatever you want if it is harmful. And a lot of people forget that. And, for example, Trump being banned from Facebook, at least for the next 6 months. And a lot of people on the right are claiming that is an infringement upon his free speech. Well, Facebook is a company that can do pretty much whatever they want and choose the rules of their platform. Now, are you not for deregulation, people on the right? Okay. Facebook is just they're making their rules, and Trump has infringed upon those rules, so he's out. It's really that simple, isn't it? So there's a discussion that I don't feel is being had to confront the right when they're making these kind of statements about these so-called infringements on free speech and this so-called cancel culture.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think mostly that kind of talk is in academic forums. So there were certain professors and people that I follow in my Facebook group and on my Facebook anyway. And it's often the academics who has that knowledge and that power of words to actually counteract that. But we don't see that in mainstream media a lot.
No.
You know, they're kind of in their own little bubble here of academics going, this is not free speech.
See, I'm trying to have those kind of conversations on my podcast. I had put up, I can't even remember what it was. It was something about Facebook keeping Trump off of their platform. And it led to like over 100 different comments back and forth. So I chose the two main conversationalists on my thread there. And I said, would you two, because they're throwing all kinds of stuff back. Some of it was kind of snarky and mean-spirited, but for the most part, they were the one guy was holding himself to the left rhetoric. The other guy was holding himself to the pro-Trump rhetoric. I'm not even going to call it right rhetoric because the right and pro-Trump, there's two different things.
Yeah.
So they were pretty much holding themselves to that. But again, there was a lot of nuance that was overseen in that written format on Facebook. So I got an idea. I said, hey, would you two like to come on my podcast and we can have a panel discussion pretty much where the two of you talk and debate on this issue and I'm the moderator. And all of a sudden they're like, whoa, I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, why are you doing this online? Why are you doing this on Facebook then? Are you are you just trying to troll? Are you just trying to look cool or something? Are you just having fun spewing out rhetoric? Or do you really want to have this conversation and possibly learn something, possibly resolve something? So I moved those two into a chat group. And I was finally able to get the guy representing pretty much the right or the pro-Trump side to say, yes, I'll do it. But the guy on the left has not said yet that he will do it. He wants a list of questions. He wants to be able to prepare and whatnot. And I'm kind of thinking, I kind of put my quasi-journalist hat on, and I started wondering, well, does this guy really believe in all the stuff he was saying in this 100 or so comments on my Facebook thread? Does he really believe that? What does he need to prepare for? What does he need a list of questions and topics for? So I think we've gotten into this way of talking about social issues and talking about politics that fits only online, like on Facebook and Twitter, for entertainment purposes almost. Right. I think people are they have this bucket full of left-wing or right-wing phrases and terms and ways of name-calling and trolling and owning. Oh, I owned him, Yeah. And I think that's what it's been reduced to, and that substantive conversation is missing. Like you said, it's the academics who are having it, but it's not coming forward on the news. And every once in a while here in Norway, you'll see a panel discussion, but again, it seems that they are just pulling up these, these prefabricated lines, these prefabricated idealistic statements that don't really have any substance. Yeah.
No, and I find like the problem is with a lot of academic is that they can word things in their own academic, realm. But, as journalists, we actually try to understand the complexity of things and trying to make it understandable in layman terms.
Well, exactly. And that was my whole reason. And that's problematic. That was my whole reason for wanting these two. And these two have been very active on my Facebook threads. And that's my whole reason for wanting to bring them into the podcast and let them see facial expression. Let them hear nuance. Let this be a real discussion instead of this bullshit that people do back and forth on Facebook. Shame on me for posting what I posted, which then stimulated to that bullshit discussion.
But you wanted to understand. You wanted to know, because this is something I do sometimes on my Facebook wall as well. I wanted to understand what's going on. And sometimes I have comments coming in that were like ridiculous. Yeah. And people like on my chat going like, why are you not firing that guy? Why are you not blocking that guy and everything? I was like, no. I really want to know why this guy thinks the way he did.
I haven't blocked anyone off of Facebook in years. I may totally disagree. I may think someone is a lunatic, but I still am fascinated by that view. Where did it come from? What do they mean by that? Yeah.
Yeah. I only block two guys. Most of them are white guys. And when they become a little bit misogynistic and cross the line with me, they're out. And I don't care because, Oslo's actually quite similar. So.
But see, I even let things like that stay because it shows something. If people have their eyes open and if they're really trying to figure out things, that misogynist or that blatant racist or that condescending person, it is so, it's a very teachable thing to view. So I even let those people stay on my line. I do.
I think it really depends. Like, it became quite aggressive. I think for me, like it wasn't just like a very adultly mature talk. It became very aggressive, like going, "Oh, you always think you're right, Comin." And it's like there's no point in talking to someone who is so hyped in that certain way. There's no conversation to be had anymore. And for me, blocking them is actually I'd rather have a conversation with someone else, which was a little bit more mature.
And there's no reason to take abuse. There's no reason to take
no
abuse.
Exactly. I'm not going to tolerate that. If you step over the line, you're gone. I don't care. And particularly these people are in Oslo. I will meet them, but I don't care. Because it's like, I think I need to start making these boundaries. And so,
That's actually something I wanted to ask you about. Now, you're not just a journalist, you're an investigative journalist, which means you dig into cases and you might be digging on ground that people don't want uncovered. Do you ever feel scared? Do you ever feel threatened? Do you ever worry about your safety?
I can tell you a story what happened when I first started out. The stalking case that happened, the perpetrator figured out who I was because I was running another blog at the time. And he wrote an email to me threatening me, saying, I'm going to get you deported and everything. I knew that was kind of empty, but the fact that he actually saw me very closely with this girl that he was stalking, the fact that he took some time to figure me out, one of the things I was extremely worried was he will figure out where my daughter is going to go to school too. And so basically I was afraid, I literally, one of the things I remember this NGO telling me was that these perpetrators want to scare you and want you to isolate you. The more isolated you are, the more endangered you are. So I ended up telling a lot of people in my network, my professional network, my friends network and everything, like if a guy like this guy approaches you asking information about me, do not give him any information. This guy is a stalker and he's a perpetrator in my case, basically. And then I actually went to my daughter's barnehage, which is the kindergarten, and I explained them to the situation. And it was the first time I really felt the community in Norway have failed me. And that was when I told them, if you see this man approaching the school grounds or anything, please call the police. And then the kindergarten, the leader, the principal in that kindergarten, she was saying like, "Oh, it's not our job. We're not the police. I think you need to remove your daughter from the school."
You're kidding me. That was the response.
No, that was the response. She said, you need to go to the police for this type. I was like I did go to the police, but the thing is, I already knew with the police that they couldn't do very much. It's a documentation of me reporting the case, and that was it. But with people around, they should be careful, who they allow in the grounds anyway.
Sure.
So then I told them like, relax. I already told the police already knows, but my daughter's here is under your supervision, which means that just keep an eye out. It's like, okay, we will show this to all of our staff here, but really is not our job. So if anything happens, it's not on us, basically. So I was quite upset, and I realized that in passively I became a victim of stalking as well at that time. Even though I was covering the case of stalking, but I became the victim of it too. And that really worried me. And there were many times where I caught myself in dangerous situations. And, when you start off as a journalist very early on, you're not going to be able to be part of a union in a sense, because in the union, they have certain criteria that you need to be working as a journalist, 30%, and you have to, really show it in some ways. And I couldn't really, because it was kind of early on and I'm trying to create cases of my own. And so, I do. And there were cases like even now with the investigation, I do know we had to anonymize a lot of the women who came forward to us because their ex-husband are very affluent, wealthy people. And
you're talking about the domestic abuse cases that you're working on. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so these are foreign mothers who are caught in the legal system in trying to fight custody over their kids and things like that. Yeah. And if their partner is quite wealthy and they know how the gray areas work in the legal system, they have such an advantage. Yeah. And one of them, given the evidence that she was showing me and, potential hackings and things like that, I was very worried about my startup, the liability and, the risks that we were taking. Yes. And we were also very worried about their own safety as well. Yeah. So it took at least a year or so for me to kind of really figure out how to run these stories, because I want to make sure that everyone's safe, and that any details that we have of the perpetrator or the potential perpetrator, we eliminate anything that can tell who he is. Right. Because these were very powerful people, and if I were to go up against them, there's no way I were going to win. In fact, I would probably go bankrupt, basically.
Yeah, money talks.
Absolutely, and this is the thing. I constantly have to meet with. Is I do get people telling me stories, and I know the risk of it. You may think just talking about cases of foreign mothers, that would be not so much of a risk, but there is, because I'm very close in contact and I'm writing a story about someone. And, I get a lot of men around me saying that, why did you not get his side of the story? Now, if the problem was that if we did do that, then we already exposed the story that we were writing about him.
Yes.
And there was a lot of ethical questions we have to ask, how do we make sure the accuracy of the story? How do we continue the integrity of journalism and things like that? There's a lot of processes in the editorial room where we were discussing how this can be done. So yeah, absolutely. I get scared, and I still get scared a lot of the stories, because sometimes when you investigate something, you may think, okay, this is the starting point. The more you dig, the more you realize that there's something more to this. This is very systemical. Yes. It could be involving a politician. It could be involving some people in higher power, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, because you make a lot of friends doing that kind of work, but you also make some enemies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was not something that I take very lightly with my work. And I don't think people understand the extent of my work. It's only until now that I tell people these type of things that happened to me as a journalist. And even for me, I'm still fighting the respect from Norwegian journalists to see me as a journalist. And that's another part of it, because you want people on your side. You want to create allies. But if the potential allies don't see you as equal as them, you're kind of on your own. So a lot of times I feel like I'm on my own. I'm kind of like a lone wolf trying to deal with a lot. So
I had a Norwegian journalist who was actually interviewing and filming and talking with me for a story they were going to do on a major television network. I'll just say that, a major television network here in Norway. And he said something kind of half joking, but also an element of seriousness to it, was that they don't, he put the impression out there that they don't respect podcasters. And I said, half joking, but also half serious, I says, well, if the news media, your organization, for example, were to have a job for me, a meaningful job for me, then maybe Norway would have one less podcaster.
That's a good comeback.
Actually. Yeah, and he didn't know what to do with that, but there seems to be, I don't know, is elitism the right word? A certain element of that in the Norwegian journalistic community.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And one of the things that I continuously tell people, because I know there are immigrants who have quite a bad experience with journalists. So when I come up and show up as a journalist, they already have that skepticism towards me. So I often explain to them, I believe journalists and media outlets, they should not be gatekeepers. They've been being gatekeepers for way, way too long. They should be gate openers. We should be having those doors open and looking at ways forward for how do we bring all the society and people together and move forward together. And I have no problem with citizen journalism. Some people have it. But I often say the stories are out there, and the people who tell it, especially when it comes to journalism, there is a framework. There's this ethical framework that we have to live by. There's a code of ethics that we can't cross over. But in all honesty, I've seen so many Norwegian journalists, crossing over that time and time again, even publications in this country being funded by the government who are quite, far right-wing propaganda channels getting funded, that really, really, they've crossed that line of code of ethics. And I was very, what's the word? Frustrated and angry and just baffled by the fact that there were the unions and the Norwegian authority on, editorial work are not going up against that, of the things that being published. That was something that really baffled me even today. And I realized that the thing is in Norway is that you have 3 major media groups. And it often depends on who's funding them, but they are running the whole entire show. Basically, you see, a lot of the bigger ones that they're from 3 major media group. And that really goes to show just the kind of this ecosystem, I would say.
Yeah, well, it doesn't allow for it doesn't allow for very much diversity of thought.
No, it doesn't. And that's something that I've been frustrated with, and the fact that they hold so much power, and the fact that that guy had the audacity to put you down that way, that made me even more angry, because who the hell does he think he is? Just because he is a journalist on a TV show, has been there for a long time, that he has the audacity to tell people that they can't tell stories. This is what I get really, really annoyed, because for me, I feel like anyone can be a journalist. They do not need to go through the degrees here. They don't need to go to Oslo Med. They don't need to go to University of Oslo to take a degree in journalism and be able to call themselves journalists. Journalists are storytellers. They can just pick up the phone and just tell you the story and the events. And as long as they keep within the boundaries and, the code of ethics, they are reporters in my eyes, and they should always be so.
You called me a storyteller a little earlier. Maybe I need to update my resume. Storyteller and wannabe journalist.
Yes, why not? I mean, the thing is, like, every storyteller has a knack for journalism.
I think so.
And I think, like, as long as you, like I said, as a journalist, you go through a lot of rigorous, editorial process. You're looking for accuracy. You're looking for, do you have the integrity? Do you keep the dignity of the people you're interviewing?
Yes.
And making sure of those things. Of course, not all the code of ethics, have everything comprehensive enough. But for us, especially with the Oslo Desk, we look into the dignity of the people we're talking to at all times, and looking at what is the narrative that we're portraying here? Are we perpetuating a narrative that's often very negative already? Or can we do something more about this?
Yes.
Is those lines of questioning that a real true journalist would go through. And I think you do that. Yeah. So I don't think that any journalist that works for, I'm sorry to say, NRK, TV2, whatever you guys think you are not the best journalist in the goddamn world. I'm sorry to say, you are not. And the very fact is, you do not have the global competence. You don't have the diversity lens on you, and you just going out there thinking you're better than others, it makes me annoyed. And what makes me even more annoyed is that, yes, you're hiring interns with minority background, but the thing is, like I said to you, John, before, the same shit goes in and goes out. Yeah. If the same methodology of how you report in journalism is still the same shit comes out. So although, like, you got really good minority reporters, I'm not saying that you guys are bad. I know some are really, really good. But they still have that elitist mentality that really annoys me, because there are still minorities, model minorities, who are still closing the door behind their backs. They're not allowing others to come through. That really annoys me. And I've been very outspoken about it. And I think that's one thing that I really want to change society here, especially with the international community, is how we need to come together collectively and not thinking that your ego taking place, that, oh, I've gone this far, I shake hands with politicians and white folks that in high places, that I'm going to forget everyone else. I'm going to say I'm helping immigrants, but really, are you? The question is, because that's what I'm asking, because I've seen this over the last decade of me living in Norway. There's so many people that's gone in the press. These are people who spoke really loudly, who has done so much for diversity. Thank you. I know you did. But why has it taken this long? Why can you not be a little bit more radical in your decisions, in allowing other people to come with you?
Yes.
Now, I've been put in a position before when I first came into Norway. I worked for somebody who feared me. He feared that I was going to go above, and I did. So I didn't care.
What do you mean go above? What do you mean by that?
Well, the thing is, it's like, I don't know whether you've been in those situations where people who are a little bit older than you, who's been in the system a lot longer, and they're well known or whatever, dealing with issues. But if they see someone younger who is very talented, who could compete and can go, beyond and beyond what she is doing, rather than seeing us as allies, she would find any ways to put you down.
Yes,
they do that, and I was put in that situation. That I didn't realize, but it was only until like other people, co-workers of mine, started telling me about, what the boss did behind my back. I realized that, if that's the case. And it was not just her. There were other people. I've had like previous ex-bosses of mine saying that, I would never allow you to come work for me. I would get my cousin to work for me. And these were minority people in the society. Okay. They're not like white Norwegians. I understand that with white Norwegians, but when minorities do that, my heart sinks even more. And that's really like frustrating for me.
We need to, I'm always looking for allies, but we need to be our own. We need more cohesiveness in the minority community here in Norway. And of course, back home in the United States, but more closer to home for me now here in Norway. What do you think brings that feeling? What do you think makes minorities want to step on other minorities? The classic crabs in a bucket pulling each other down type of thing. Where does that come from?
I think it's a scarcity mindset. I think because like I feel like as immigrants we are left with the crumbs, to deal with. Like if you look at
crabs in a bucket.
Yeah. So is that, and it's like and also like people want to, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure, but in my mind is often a lot to do with ego at the end of the day. I think it's a lot to do with that. I want to take my space. This is my space. I want to be the go-to person for experts, on X, Y, and Z. And they see that other people who are doing that, they're going to have another slice of the cake. I want to have the whole entire cake, type of thing. So, and it's a fear. I think it comes out of fear at the end of the day. It's coming out of ego. It comes out of fear. And I don't think, people should have that fear. I mean, yes, sure, there are people who wants to rise above and kick people along the side. I've seen that. I've seen many startups that are similar with different intentions and attitudes. Some of them had so much ego than the other, and they're just trying to hold their ground. And I find that really disturbing in the startup world. It's kind of like the elbows, like, this is mine. Sort of thing. And yeah, I think
we have to try and pull. We have to try and pull each other up. I'm trying to rise up, but I'm also trying to take people with me.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to amplify the stories of some people. I had Rawa on. That episode is out now today, and I want to amplify. I want to tell people what she's doing. I'll be releasing your episode, and I want to amplify your story. And if more of us, more of the minority community in Norway, had that mindset. Yes, do the work for yourself. Do everything you can for yourself, but look at every opportunity that you have to bring someone with you. I think we would be better off, and I think Norway as a nation would be better off as well.
And I think I told you as well, John, that my ambition is to create an international media house just as good as the Schibsted Media Group. Because if we all stand together collectively, how much power is that? People will say, it's kind of a bit like, you're creating a wall of people, right? And then it's really hard for people to attack you. But if you are so dispersed and polarized and minorities not having that cohesiveness, it's so easy for, divide and conquer, the other. So if we are stuck together, and I truly believe that, and I believe that after 3 years of finding the right people, I'm getting there. Just like you said, you got the circle of people, you're meeting people. It's the same with me. Like they have their own circle of friends who have that same mentality, and we're coming together. And I'm looking forward to having more people to come together, where we're looking at how we can be like another media outlet that people can trust and follow as well.
I look at it as a spiral, but not a downward spiral, an outward spiral. I'm meeting this person, which then leads me to me. It's almost like a pyramid scheme. and making more and more connections, being influenced by more and more positive people, and then hopefully in return influencing more and more people, just spreading the positivity, spreading the word, spreading the influence, spreading the motivation. That's what I'm trying to do. Now, as far as what you're trying to do, how far along are you in making the Oslo Desk into this this powerhouse, this conglomerate? Are you reaching out trying to reach out into other mediums? How far along are you? What remains to be done?
I don't know if I should say this. It's not quite official, but maybe I should say a little bit. But it's been going
breaking
around
news. Breaking news on the Ka Man Mak podcast with John Allen. Breaking news.
So I recently got approached by a radio station after he picked up an article about me regarding conference. So he's asked me to take over the radio station. So, and I also have a lot of friends with certain startup and companies, and we're kind of now looking at where the energy is coming together.
Now, when you say take over, do you mean take over in management or take over as in ownership?
Ownership,
okay.
The whole entire thing. So, which means that it gives me that flexibility. Like, oh wow, okay, then there's a radio station. I got my own publication website, and we got the podcast, and we got other few people who are doing their own things. Rob is one of those people as well that we're looking at how we can have that synergy together, and also so things are coming together.
How big of a radio station is it? Does it cover only Oslo? Does it have national coverage as far as listenership? The radio station is done in quite an interesting way. It's not quite normal in the sense that it has several different languages. So every day it's running it at a different language. I see.
So that it can probe into a lot of the ethnic minority groups here nationally, even because this is something you can listen to them digitally. I'm not going to say the name, no. but it's done in such a way that that it has its purpose, it has a legacy of its own, and they have been approached by the public health institution to try and get information now, especially about the COVID regulations, and the health information towards these different community groups. So there is that interesting part to what they do, and they do have. It is a very niche. It is very, very niche. I would say it's a very niche radio station, but it's kind of reason why he kind of brought me on, trying to see if there's anything else that could be done with that. Right. Because it, in the sense that it was something that we had been discussing internally in the Oslo Desk as well. Like, how do we reach more people who may not know English very well? How can we, have it in different languages? And I realized that a lot of people who are doing businesses and startup, trying to help the immigrant society and community, they are looking into this too. I know a friend of mine who, Chisholm, who had her space and Diversify. She has funding to create these videos in different languages to talk about, the COVID situation, what you need to do, washing your hands and everything. And she managed to do that. And I think we're all more and more and are trying to serve the immigrant community as much as possible. And of course, there's a generation gap in some sense that there's some who had a lot more digital presence, some people are not. So that's why the radio station is still, I think it kind of penetrates a lot more older generation, but I think it's still equally as important as well. So I think, it's exciting, I must admit, having to have that kind of opportunity.
I'm not even involved and I get excited.
So it's like I'm still trying to get people involved, and seeing how we can do things, because I don't have a business background. And I often say this, I'm still learning a lot how to build up a media house, how that works and function, how things could be administered. And I need all these external helps, people who believe in what we're trying to do, and people I can trust. Yes. And that's the most important point, that I can trust them with the confidential information that I will give them, and look at how we can build this up. But it's been 3 years now, and it's been, to compare with many startup, we're quite slow in a sense, but I think this is the year that I think things could really move a very big step forward.
That's exciting.
And I think it is, and it's a little bit scary for me, but it's I think we're at the right point where we need to be in our journey, and it's just trying to get people involved and who are able to help me build this, because I don't
really know how. And I'm still looking for answers. I'm still learning.
But you obviously have the right instincts, because there has been growth. You're still here. Things are happening. So you obviously have the right instincts. If you don't have that practical background that can be applied to it, you at least have the right instincts, and the drive. The drive is there. The energy is there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think like that's what people had really said a lot about me is my perseverance.
Yes.
It just keeps going. Like even
it's admirable.
my personal, it is. I don't know. It's
I know.
Okay, I'll take it.
Just say thank you.
I think like for me, it's just the fact that I don't know. I just often, I knew this like as a kid that I have this drive for things. Like I remember like in my family, I was the only one who said that I will not change my name to an English name. People need to learn my name. It must be Ka Man Mak. I don't care. My mother was very worried. She said, because my sister and my brother, they both have English names that they use, that I refuse to change my name because I know like the hardship would be a lot, worse for me. Yeah. But I felt that, this drive, this determination. I always have this kind of moral aspect of wanting to do good in society, no matter what. And I find like I've been in very interesting conversations, mostly with religious people. It's like, oh, but you may be doing good, but how are you going to get to paradise, or where are you going to get to heaven? I'm like, I said that I'll leave that up to the end when I die. We'll see what happens. Yes. But I think like, but we'll see what happens then. But I think like for me, it's the drive to making sure that the society that we're living in should be better. I really truly believe that human suffering that we see today, a lot of it can be eliminated.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of it is because people have policies, is because of how the structure of society is. And I think that should be gone. Yeah. And I think I trying to do that through the Oslo Desk in my way and trying to carry on with the hope of looking at what I can do. Because I often think of me as a soldier amongst a bigger army of people that I don't know where they are, but I'm looking for my own soldiers, I guess.
The lonely soldier, yeah.
So I need to meet my other soldier, and we're going to create that song.
There's a song in that. Maybe I need to put some lyrics down. There's a song in that about this lonely soldier searching for. Yeah, there's something there. That'd be
interesting. I will listen to that. You have to send it to me when you do it. So, but that's how I felt always. I always felt quite alone, but I always feel like the more I continue wanting to survive and wanting to continue to live and do the good, I will meet other people. It may take me longer, but hopefully it'll cross my path. And I think I'm meeting those people. I mean, in the past 3 years, I'm starting to see these people coming onto my path little by little. And I think this year has escalated, because I think what happened was a lot of the coverage that we did with the Black Lives Matter movement had really put us in the spotlight.
Okay.
So we were the only ones who did the whole entire live stream, because the organizers themselves had issues technically, so they weren't able to live stream. But so everyone was like coming to the Oslo Desk live stream, and Melanie was there with the live stream, and I was like in the U.S. Embassy doing the little bit of live stream there and everything. So we have a really good comprehensive coverage, and I think people started realizing the importance of our presence. And I think that momentum just went shut up, to now. People start realizing the work. But besides journalism, it's a lot to do with that, creating that space to talk about media and how undiverse it is, because I think people were craving that. And I realized that when we had the conference about a month or so ago, when we had some comments, a lot of the people who registered were students around the world who were saying like at university, they're learning about journalism, but they're not talking about the issues like diversity and
Right.
And they came they came to learn it from this conference. I was like, wow, okay, so we have actually a global crisis issue here.
Interesting.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, what can I say? I got just as motivated and inspired from this conversation as I thought I would. I think you're an amazing person. I think you're doing amazing work. And I'm looking forward to the day where you can get rid of that part-time job and where the Oslo Desk is also a radio show, a written form newspaper, a podcast, and to be seen on television. Now that would be cool. That would be cool.
That would be cool. We'll just have to keep going, moving forward, and hopefully I get more people involved because, I can't do this alone. Let's put it that way. So.
Yeah. Well, you're the kind of person that attracts like-minded people. There are other people out there, and you're finding them one at a time, and you're building your team, and things are going to happen. Yeah. I know it. I know these things. I know these things. Everything will be fine.
We'll have a party afterwards.
Well, listen, Comin, I truly appreciate this. I want you to know you always have a spot on my podcast. If there's anything you want to talk about, anything you want to promote, whatever that may be, you've got a place here. This is the beginning of a friendship. Hopefully the beginning of some kind of working relationship. You and I think too much alike to not have conversations like this several more times in the coming days and weeks and months and years.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure meeting you. So.
Yeah. Comin, everybody. Check her out, the Oslo Desk. Where do they find you? Do you have a website, by the way?
We do. It's called oslodesk.com. We are trying to redesign it.
Oslodesk.com.
Yeah, oslodesk.com. So we're at the process of redeveloping the website a little bit. So you'll see it coming. So
it'll be there.
It'll be there. So yeah, we also have Toddcast, which is our podcast. And also you can find us on Facebook and on Instagram. We're a little bit more active on Facebook, I must admit. So follow us there.
Okay. Well, hey, everybody, go find her. Go find the Oslo Desk. Ka Man Mak, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, John.